Police! Who was your least smart criminal? I was driving my friends home one night after a party. There weren't enough seats in my car, so two of my friends offered to ride in the trunk. As we were driving, the police pulled me over. The officer came up to my window and asked if I knew why he had stopped me. I said, "Because of the two people in the trunk?" The officer replied, "No, actually, I pulled you over because you didn't use your turn signal back at the last intersection. But tell me more about the people in your trunk." I felt my heart start racing. I knew this was bad. Having people riding in the trunk is illegal. I stumbled over my words as I tried to explain the situation. The officer just stared at me, waiting for an answer. I couldn't think of a good excuse, so I eventually just admitted that my friends were in the trunk because there weren't enough seats. The officer shook his head in disbelief. He told me to have my friends get out of the trunk immediately. Luckily, he only gave me a ticket for the turn signal violation and didn't charge me for the illegal passengers. I learned my lesson that night. No more cramming people into my car's trunk, no matter how desperate the situation. Story 2. About a month ago, my apartment was broken into while my boyfriend was still inside. He works the night shift, so in the middle of the day he was fast asleep and didn't notice the intruder come in and start going through our stuff. Eventually, the burglar threw open the bedroom door, saw my boyfriend, panicked, and ran away. My boyfriend looked around and saw that the laptops, tablets, and other big items were still there. The guy must have run off before he could grab all of it. But some smaller valuables like USB drives, keys, and wallets were missing. The intruder had also done some damage rummaging around and spray painting our walls. He even ate our cookies. However, the burglar had left behind his own belongings, a school backpack containing schoolwork, some of our stolen possessions, his ID, and old school papers with his parents' phone numbers. So we already knew who he was. The police came and got a good laugh out of the situation as they took my boyfriend's statement. Then, right in the middle of that, there was a knock at the door. I went to answer it, thinking it was a friend, but it was the same guy from the ID, the burglar himself. He looked at me, then at the police officer behind me who was still holding the backpack, and he actually asked, "Can I have my bags back, please?" The police officer immediately grabbed him, and my boyfriend confirmed that this was the guy who had broken in. The police said it was the dumbest thing they had ever seen, like something out of a comedy show. It even made the local news. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 3. I was involved in a DUI trial where the defendant chose to represent herself in court. It ended up being a total disaster to watch. During the trial, the defendant tried to introduce some evidence to help her case, but the prosecutor quickly blocked her from doing that. I think the judge kind of felt bad for how poorly the woman's defense was going, so the judge asked to see this evidence that the defendant had. It turned out to be a receipt from the bar the defendant had left right before I stopped her. The receipt showed that she had purchased 2 large margaritas. Her whole defense was that she couldn't have been drunk after only having 2 drinks. Obviously, that didn't work. She was found guilty of the DUI. The reason I had pulled her over in the first place was that she had driven her car down an embankment on the side of the road just to get to the McDonald's drive-thru. It was a pretty wild scene to witness. This woman really didn't know what she was doing by trying to represent herself in court. Her evidence didn't help her at all, and the judge and prosecutor pretty much had to hold her hand through the whole trial. It was a big mess, but in the end, justice was served and she was convicted of the DUI. Story 4. I got a call about a shoplifting incident at the local CVS. When I checked the area, I saw 2 guys matching the description. I stopped them and searched them, and sure enough, they had a few Coronas and some off-brand whiskey that they had stolen from the store. I confirmed with CVS that these were the suspects and that the alcohol belonged to them. The store wanted to press charges, so I had to take the guys to the police station to be booked and fingerprinted. After that, they would be given a court date a couple months in the future. On the way to the station, I asked the guys what they were thinking, stealing the alcohol like that. One of them said that they were only 20 years old, so they couldn't buy it legally, so they just decided to steal it instead. I get that young people sometimes make stupid mistakes, so I didn't give them too much of a hard time about it. When we got to the station, I started filling out the citation paperwork. The citation asked for their birth dates and ages. I did the math on one guy's birthday and realized that he was actually 21 years old enough to buy alcohol legally. I went back and double-checked his birthday on his ID. Yep, it was the same one I had written down, and he was definitely 21. So I asked him again how old he was, and he insisted that he was 20. I just left it at that and finished up the paperwork. I guess he really didn't want to admit that he was old enough to buy the alcohol and had still chosen to steal it. Story 5. I got a call to respond to an apartment complex about a kid who was stuck on the roof. When I got there, the fire department had already arrived, and they were in the process of getting the kid down safely. After the kid was back on the ground, I asked him why he had been eating a corn dog up on the roof. His answer left me completely speechless. He said, "Because I threw it up there." The way he said it, with this totally matter-of-fact expression on his face, was just so bizarre. Like it was the most obvious reason in the world for a kid to be eating a corn dog while stuck on an apartment roof. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at him for a moment, trying to process the sheer ridiculousness of his explanation. Throwing your food up onto the roof and then getting stuck trying to retrieve it? That's the kind of thing you'd expect from a little kid, not an older kid who should know better. The kid's casual duh attitude about the whole situation really threw me off. I guess he thought his actions made perfect sense, but to me, and I'm sure the firefighters too, it was just about the dumbest thing we'd ever heard. I didn't even know how to respond. I was just left standing there, speechless at the kid's strange logic. Story 6. One of my friends had his phone stolen once. Instead of just giving up on getting it back, he came up with a clever plan. He called the phone number, and amazingly, the burglar actually answered. My friend told the thief that he was willing to pay to get his phone back. The burglar agreed, and they set up a time and place to meet for the exchange. But here's the twist. My friend didn't show up alone. He brought the police with him. When the burglar showed up with the stolen phone, expecting to make the trade, he was shocked to see the officers there waiting for him. The look on the robber's face when he realized it was a trap must have been priceless. A real Pikachu face moment. The police were able to arrest him, and my friend got his phone back. It was a risky move, but my friend's quick thinking and willingness to work with the police really paid off. He didn't just let the thief get away with his property. Instead, he outsmarted the criminal and helped the authorities catch him red-handed. Story 7. I was working as a dispatcher when I got a call from a guy who said he was currently violating a protective order by being with his ex-girlfriend. The ex-girlfriend was pregnant with his child. The caller wanted us to call the judge and get the protective order dismissed so that he and his ex could go into a restaurant and eat together. Meanwhile, one of our police officers was standing right next to me, listening in on the call. The officer asked me to have the caller tell us where he was so we could send the judge to meet them. But as soon as the officer asked that, the guy suddenly hung up the phone. It was a really strange and frustrating call to deal with. The guy was openly admitting to violating a court order, and then he had the nerve to ask us to help him get out of the trouble he was in. He clearly didn't understand how the legal system works. I feel bad for the ex-girlfriend having to deal with a situation like that, and the fact that she's pregnant just makes it even more complicated. But the caller was being completely unreasonable, thinking we could just call a judge and make the protective order go away like that. Thankfully, the police officer was there and ready to respond, in case the caller decided to show up somewhere. But he ended up chickening out and hanging up as soon as the officer got involved. What a bizarre call that was. Story 8. I used to work at a smoke shop, and one night we had a pretty crazy break-in happen. 3 guys broke through a large window to get inside, leaving blood all over the place from how hard they were trying to force their way in. The weird thing is, they completely ignored all the fancy, expensive glass pipes, and just went straight for the cheap Chinese bongs. They grabbed as many of those as they could carry and then tried to get back out through the same tiny window they came in through. In the process, they ended up breaking 2 or 3 more bongs. As they were running away, it looked like they had dropped a bunch of the stolen stuff because there was a trail of broken glass leading right across the street to an apartment building. The cops followed that trail straight to the bottom floor balcony, where they could see the 3 burglars sitting there smoking from the one bong that had survived the whole ordeal. Turns out, these guys were actually regular customers at the shop. I guess they just really wanted those cheap bongs, even though they could have taken way more valuable stuff if they had wanted to. The cops ended up arresting them right there on the balcony. We never saw those 3 guys in the shop again after that incident. I guess they learned their lesson about breaking in and stealing, even if they did manage to get away with a few bongs. It was just such a bizarre and clumsy attempt at a robbery. They seemed more interested in the cheap stuff than the high-end merchandise. Pretty wild to see it all unfold. Story 9. I witnessed a really crazy car accident one day. I saw a girl lose control of her car and crash it, causing the car to roll over and slam into a tree. It was clear to me that she had been driving drunk when it happened. The fire department arrived about 10 minutes later, and by that time, the girl's car had started leaking gasoline everywhere. Then her husband showed up on foot and tried to calm her down. A little while after that, her mother showed up in her own car. Even though no one else had been in the car with the girl when the crash happened, she tried to claim in court a year later that it was actually her mother who had been driving. Can you believe that? She was just making up stories to try to get out of being held responsible. Oh, and there's one more crazy part to the story. The girl actually punched a police officer in the face at some point, and they had to pepper spray her. I guess she was just getting more and more desperate to avoid the consequences of her actions. Needless to say, she was found guilty in the end. Her story about her mother driving just didn't hold up, especially with all the evidence and witness accounts. She was clearly the one who had crashed the car while driving drunk. It was a wild situation to witness, but I'm glad I was able to provide my evidence in court to help convict her. Story 10. I work as a correctional officer, and we get all kinds of interesting characters coming through. One time, I had a new inmate ask me if I could bring him some drugs into the jail. I actually laughed out loud when he said that, thinking he must be joking. But then I realized he was completely serious. He didn't see what the big deal was. He told me he always asks the staff at every jail he goes to if they can smuggle him in some drugs. I had to explain to him that just asking a question like that to a staff member could get him sent to solitary confinement as punishment. The inmate didn't seem to understand why that would be such a huge problem. I guess he thought there was nothing wrong with trying to get illegal drugs brought into the jail. But of course, that's completely against the rules and could get me in a lot of trouble too. I just shook my head at the guy's audacity, but I thanked him because requests like that from inmates actually help make my job a little more secure. The other inmates standing nearby thought it was pretty funny too. They burst out laughing when they heard what the new guy had asked me. It's always interesting working in a corrections facility and dealing with inmates who don't quite grasp how the system works. This guy clearly thought he could just waltz in and start making demands for drugs. He was in for a rude awakening. Story 11. I made a routine traffic stop, and when I asked the driver for his license and registration, he did something really bizarre. Instead of reaching for his wallet or the glove box, he leaned over to the passenger seat, grabbed a handful of lo mein noodles, and tried to hand that to me. I was completely confused. I had no idea what he was thinking. Was he trying to give me his paperwork? Or was the Chinese food some kind of strange peace offering? Either way, it was a really strange and unexpected reaction. It turned out this guy had 4 previous OUI, operating under the influence, offenses, so he was clearly not in his right mind when I pulled him over. I ended up having to arrest him for the OUI. To this day, I still wonder what was going through his head in that moment. Was he so out of it that he legitimately thought the noodles were his license and registration? Or did he somehow think that handing me his dinner would make everything okay? It's just such a bizarre thing to do during a traffic stop. I guess we'll never know for sure what his logic was, but it's definitely one of the more unusual and memorable interactions I've had on the job. The guy ended up getting locked up, but the image of him trying to hand me that handful of lo mein is just burned into my memory. It was such a strange and random thing to do. Story 12, there was this kid living in my college dorm who was selling drugs. He wasn't the brightest bulb in the box, that's for sure. One night, this guy was driving back to the dorm when a police car pulled up behind him and turned on their lights. Now, this guy had all his drug stash stored right in his car, so instead of just pulling over like a normal person, he assumed the cops were going to arrest him for possession. His brilliant idea was to drive right through a red light and pull into the dorm parking lot, thinking he could hide from the police there. But the thing is, this guy's car was really easy to spot. It had all kinds of bumper stickers, a kayak rack, and even a vanity license plate. Plus, the parking lot only had one way in and out. There was no way the cops wouldn't be able to find him. Turns out, the police officers were just going to give him a warning about a broken tail light. They weren't even planning to search his car or anything. But once this guy started trying to flee and drive recklessly, that's when he really got himself in trouble. The police ended up arresting him and taking him to jail. He also got expelled from the college for the drug dealing. And get this, the cops found his whole ledger in the car, with records of all his drug transactions, the products he was selling, and the names of his customers. This guy had literally written it all down. He was just a walking, talking example of how not to be a criminal. Everything he did, from trying to hide from the cops to keeping detailed records of his illegal activities, was so unbelievably stupid. It's a wonder he managed to stay in the drug dealing business for as long as he did. Story 13. I pulled over a lady for speeding, and when I asked her why she was going so fast, she just kept saying, "I live here. You can't give me a ticket. I live just down the street. I live here." She seemed completely shocked that I was actually going to write her a ticket, even though she was going 15 miles per hour over the speed limit. I've got plenty of other stories from my time as a police officer. One that sticks out is when a guy stole a young woman's car. This was her first car that she had worked really hard to get, and she was just devastated. For some reason, the girl's cell phone was still in the car when it got stolen. One of my colleagues, who's really good at talking trash, called the phone number. The guy answers, and the conversation goes something like this. Cop: "You motherfucker, you stole my girlfriend's car." Bad guy: "Bitch, I'll fill you up, and then fill your bok." Cop: "Bring it. No cops, no friends, just you and me at the Chevron on Main and 5th. You're a coward. I'm calling you out." "Bitch, I'm on my way." Click. We couldn't believe the guy actually fell for it and said he was coming. We hid our cars behind the gas station, and when he pulled in, we boxed him in. Turns out the guy also had a gun on him, and he was already on probation. What an idiot. In court later, the guy actually tried to claim the gun wasn't his, saying it must have been the girl's. But the jury didn't buy it. We saw him shoving something from his waistband under the seat when he saw us. That guy ended up getting killed a few years later during another police chase while he was in a stolen car. Oh, and I've got one more story for you. This one actually involves me. We were responding to a big brawl outside a club one night with like 20 guys fighting. You know, the whole Affliction and Taproot Shirt crew. We were grabbing guys, searching them, and shoving them in the nearest police car. Well, right after that, we get another call that we have to respond to right away with lights and sirens. I run to my car, and nobody's in it, so I just take off. I'm hauling down this dark, foggy street at 2 a.m., using the siren and lights, when I see this shadowy figure slide up behind me in my rearview mirror. "The jail's that way. Where are you taking me?" the guy says. I nearly crashed my car when I heard that. I jerked the wheel so hard, I think I even peed a little. Turns out some other officer had stuffed this drunk guy in the back seat of my car, and he had just been sleeping back there with his hood up. I had to pull over and calm down for a few minutes after that one. In the end, I just ended up taking the guy home, and we had a good laugh about it. Story 14. We had this inmate in our facility who was always trying to pull one over on us. He had managed to get his hands on a contraband cell phone, and he would use it to constantly call the local Crime Stoppers tip line. The inmate's plan was to try and get the Crime Stoppers organization to give him a reward if he confessed to his crimes over the phone. He did this multiple times a month. It was like a regular routine for him. Can you believe the audacity of this guy? He was literally reporting his own illegal activities, just so he could try to profit from it. I guess he thought he could outsmart the system and get paid for turning himself in. Of course, we shut that down real quick. As soon as we found out he was making those calls, we confiscated the contraband phone and hit him with additional charges for possessing it. That phone call reward scheme wasn't going to work on our watch. I have to hand it to the inmate, though. He was persistent, if nothing else. Even after getting caught the first time, he kept trying the same trick over and over again. I guess he figured he'd eventually get lucky and somebody would fall for it. But we correctional officers weren't about to let that happen. We took that cell phone away and made sure he faced the consequences for trying to game the system. Definitely one of the more creative, if misguided, attempts at getting out of trouble that I've seen from an inmate. Story 15. I've seen some pretty dumb criminals in my time, but the folks who showed up on that To Catch a Predator show really take the cake. I'll never forget this one guy. The transcripts of his conversation with the undercover cop are absolutely wild. The cop, posing as a 13-year-old girl, starts talking to this creep online. And right away, he's asking her if she's a virgin and saying he wants to, do some inappropriate things to her. The nerve of this guy. When the host, Chris Hansen, confronts him about it, the perp tries to play it off like he's just there to watch football. Like, what kind of excuse is that? The transcript makes it crystal clear that he knew the girl was underage. He even asks her not to tell anyone about their conversation, as if that would somehow make it okay. I'll never understand the twisted logic of these predators. They think they can just show up, try to take advantage of a child, and then wiggle their way out of it. Needless to say, this guy was in a heap of trouble. The evidence against him was damning. I'm sure he ended up facing some serious charges for his sickening behavior. Honestly, I'm glad these To Catch a Predator stings exist. They really shine a light on how dangerously stupid and depraved some criminals can be. This guy is a prime example of that. What an absolute numbskull. Story 16. I'll never forget the time a couple of the dumbest burglars tried to break into my high school. These guys must have thought they were real masterminds or something, but let me tell you, they were anything but. It all started when my buddies and I noticed that the soda machines in the cafeteria had been completely smashed up. Turns out, a couple of knuckleheads had broken in and trashed the place. Now you'd think these guys would at least try to cover their tracks, right? But nope, not these two geniuses. The best part is, our school had security cameras set up all over the place, so the cops knew exactly who had done it. These two clowns showed up in their Letterman jackets with their names printed right on the back. I mean, talk about making it easy for the police. When the officers questioned them, the burglars actually had the nerve to say they covered their faces so they wouldn't get caught, as if wearing your own personalized jacket wasn't the biggest giveaway ever. These guys must have thought they were the next Ocean's 11 or something. Needless to say, the whole thing was a total disaster for them. The security footage and their bright, shiny jackets were more than enough evidence to lock them up. I heard they ended up facing some pretty serious charges for the break-in and vandalism. Talk about a couple of dimwits. They really made it a cakewalk for the cops to track them down. I still can't believe the sheer stupidity of these two. I mean, who in their right mind would wear their own Letterman jacket to a crime scene? It's like they were begging to get caught. Sometimes you just have to shake your head at how dumb some criminals can be. Story 17. I'll never forget the case of the guy with 13 different identities. It was one of the most bizarre things I've ever encountered as a police officer. This guy was really something else. It all started when I got a call about a string of thefts from parked cars in the area. When I arrived on the scene, I noticed a suspicious-looking individual hanging around. After a bit of questioning, I decided to search him. And boy, did I hit the jackpot. This guy had wallets, phonies, and all sorts of other stolen goods on him. Over a dozen different identities worth of stuff. When I confronted him about it, he had the gall to claim that all of it belonged to him. Imagine that. 13 different sets of personal belongings, all somehow belonging to the same person. I'll give him credit. He really stuck to his story, even all the way to the courtroom. This guy pleaded not guilty, insisting that he had a legitimate reason for carrying around all of that stolen property. I've seen some creative excuses in my time, but this one takes the cake. I don't know what kind of elaborate scheme this guy was trying to pull off, but it was clear to me and the judge that he was up to no good. The evidence we found during the search was just too damning. There's no way someone can legitimately have that many different identities and personal items in their possession. Needless to say, the guy ended up getting convicted for the thefts. I guess he thought he could outsmart the system with his wild story. But justice prevailed in the end. Sometimes, you just can't beat good old-fashioned police work and a solid case. This was definitely one for the books. I'll never forget the guy with 13 different identities. Story 18. It was one of the scariest experiences of my life. But looking back, I have to admit it's kind of amusing how it all played out. About 10 years ago, I got held up by a group of guys in my neighborhood. They were armed with knives, and they just wanted the cash in my wallet. Honestly, I wasn't about to mess with those blades, so I just did what they said. But then, right at the end, one of the punks pulled a real dumb move. He put his knife to my throat and threatened me, telling me that if I ever told the cops his name, he'd slice my throat. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? As if I wasn't already terrified enough. Well, I went straight home and called the police. I gave them the name he had so foolishly revealed, and the officers said it instantly rang a bell. Turns out this guy had a history with the law. The cops must have been thrilled to get that lead. So, the next day, the police went back to the spot where I got robbed and set up an ambush. And sure enough, this knucklehead showed up, probably thinking he was in the clear. But the cops recognized him right away and arrested him on the spot. Talk about a satisfying conclusion. I have to hand it to the police. They really knew what they were doing. And I'm glad I decided to cooperate with them instead of trying to be a hero. Who knows what would have happened if I'd tried to fight back against those armed robbers? No, sir. I'll take the smart route every time. I never did find out the exact sentence this guy ended up with, but I can only imagine it wasn't too pleasant for him. The nerve of threatening me like that, and then getting caught red-handed. Sometimes the bad guys just make it way too easy for the good guys to win. Story 19. You think you've seen it all in this job, but every once in a while, a case comes along that just leaves you shaking your head. This one guy I dealt with, he really took the cake when it came to dumb criminal behavior. It all started when we caught him red-handed on the streets, possession of some serious drugs. We knew there had to be more where that came from, so we started working on getting a warrant to search his house. Little did we know this guy was one step ahead of us. Somehow, he managed to sneak in a call to his wife without us noticing. And let me tell you, the conversation we overheard was priceless. He actually told his wife, in plain language, to go take the fish out of the fridge. Fish, right? We all knew what that really meant. So, we get the warrant, storm the place, and sure enough, there's the fridge, stocked to the brim with speed. And on top of that, the wife had even taken the time to prepare a nice little fish plate, which she then promptly tossed in the trash. Talk about a coordinated effort. I almost had to applaud the audacity of these two. I mean, the nerve of this guy, calling his wife from right under our noses and using code words to tip her off. And then for her to just casually dispose of the evidence. It was almost impressive, in a twisted sort of way. Of course, it didn't save them in the end. We had more than enough to nail them both on some serious drug charges. But you can bet I'll never forget this case. The sheer stupidity of these two criminals was just off the charts. They really thought they could outsmart the cops with their little fish routine. Talk about a comedy of errors. Needless to say, I don't think they're laughing now. They learned the hard way that you can't pull one over on the police, no matter how clever you think you are. Sometimes the bad guys just make it way too easy for us to catch them. Story 20. I work as a 911 dispatcher in Florida, and let me tell you, I've seen some wild stuff. One night, I got this crazy call that I'll never forget. So, picture this. It's late, and my phone rings. On the other end, there's this young guy, probably in his early 20s, and he's freaking out. I mean, full-on panic mode. He's yelling about someone trying to kill him, steal his stuff, and even hurt his girlfriend. It was intense. Now I've dealt with drunk folks knocking on the wrong door before, thinking it's their house. That happens more than you'd think. But this felt different. This kid sounded genuinely terrified. I didn't waste any time. I sent cops racing to his place, sirens blaring. In my head, I'm thinking this is serious, like someone's breaking in and things are about to get ugly. But guess what? When the cops got there, they found out what was really going on. Are you ready for this? The intruder was just a pizza delivery guy. Turns out, our not-so-bright caller had ordered a pizza earlier and completely forgot about it. He was so high that when the delivery guy showed up, he thought he was being attacked. Can you believe it? This poor delivery dude was probably just trying to drop off a pepperoni pizza and ended up scaring the living daylights out of our stoned caller. I gotta say, in all my years as a dispatcher, that's gotta be one of the dumbest emergencies I've ever dealt with. I mean, I'm glad nobody got hurt, but man, what a waste of resources. And you can bet that delivery guy's gonna think twice before taking late-night orders to that neighborhood again. Story 21. I'm a detective, and let me tell you about this one case that still blows my mind. It all started when a dog walker stumbled upon a severed head in the park. Yeah, you heard that right. A freaking head. As the morning went on, things got even crazier. We kept finding more body parts scattered all over the park. It was like some sick, twisted scavenger hunt. But here's where it gets really wild. Each body part had a trail of blood leading away from it. Now, I've seen some weird stuff in my time, but this was next level. We decided to follow these bloody trails, and you won't believe where they led us. They all converged at this nearby house. The blood went right up to the front door, through it, and up the stairs. When we got to the top of those stairs, holy cow, there was this room that looked like something out of a horror movie. Blood everywhere, and in the middle of all this mess, there's this guy just snoring away in bed like nothing happened. Turns out, this genius had gotten wasted with his buddy. They got into a fight, and he ended up killing the poor guy. But wait, it gets better. After offing his friend, he chopped him up like a butcher and decided to play hide and seek with the body parts in the park. Then, get this, he goes back home, covered in blood, and just passes out. Can you believe it? When we woke him up, he was totally confused. He couldn't figure out how we caught him so fast. I mean, dude, you left a literal trail of evidence. I've dealt with some dumb criminals in my day, but this guy? He takes the cake. He was caught red-handed. And I mean that literally. His hands were still covered in blood. This case definitely goes down in my book as one of the easiest solves ever, thanks to, quite possibly, the world's worst criminal mastermind. Story 22. So, I get this call about two guys trying to break into a car. The weird part? They'd been at it for over an hour. I'm thinking, these must be the world's worst car thieves. When I roll up to the scene, I'm ready for some action. But guess what? Turns out, it's actually their car. Well, sort of. It belonged to one of their moms. These two Einsteins had locked themselves out and were trying to bust in like a couple of clumsy burglars. Now you'd think that'd be the end of it, right? Just some goofballs who couldn't get into their own ride. But nope, this story's got a twist. While I'm checking things out, I notice these guys are carrying around a bunch of weird stuff. We're talking stolen mail, a bunch of phones, and all kinds of brand new stuff still in boxes inside the car. So, even though they weren't stealing this car, they'd been busy little bees stealing other things. But here's the kicker. The part that really makes me wonder how these guys managed to tie their own shoes in the morning. The whole time they were struggling to break into that driver's door? Yeah, every other door on the car was unlocked. They spent over an hour trying to force open the one locked door when they could have just reached for any other handle and walked right in. I gotta tell you, in all my years on the force, I've seen some real pieces of work. But these guys, they take the cake. They managed to get themselves arrested while trying to break into their own car that wasn't even locked. Talk about a bad day, huh? I bet their mom wasn't too happy when she found out her car had been part of their failed crime spree. But hey, at least we got some stolen stuff back and caught a couple of not-so-smooth criminals in the process. Just another day on the job, I guess. Story 23. Okay, so I'm not a cop, but I've got a story that'll make your jaw drop. I'm training to be a paramedic, and this one call really stuck with me. We got a call about a 2-year-old kid having trouble breathing. Pretty serious stuff, right? So we rush over, thinking we're going to need to do some quick work to help this poor little one. But when we get there, man, I couldn't believe my eyes. We walk into this house, and it's like we stepped into some messed up party. There's smoke everywhere, and I'm not talking cigarettes. Nope, these folks were passing around joints like it was no big deal. And get this, the baby's right there in the middle of it all. The poor kid's crying and coughing, trying to breathe in this smoky mess. I mean, who does that? I looked at my mentor, and I could tell he was as shocked as I was. He didn't waste any time, though. He whipped out his phone and called for backup. We needed the cops on this one pronto. While we waited, we started filling out some paperwork. You know, the kind that says, hey, these people shouldn't be in charge of a houseplant, let alone a kid. It's called safeguarding, and boy, did this situation need it. I'm pretty sure the cops arrested those parents right then and there for neglect. And honestly, good. That poor kid deserved way better than what those so-called adults were doing. Let me tell you, I've seen some wild stuff during my training, but this one, it takes the cake. I mean, who smokes weed around a baby that's already having trouble breathing? It's like they were trying to win some kind of worst parents ever award. That call really opened my eyes to how messed up some situations can be. I went in thinking I was going to help a sick kid and ended up in the middle of a crime scene. Talk about a learning experience, huh? I just hope that little one ended up somewhere safer after all that. Story 24. So, let me tell you about this crazy thing that happened in my neighborhood. Every day, I see this big black SUV parked across the street. It's got sheriff written on the side in huge letters. You can't miss it. I never knew if the guy who lives there is actually the sheriff or just works for him, but either way, you'd think it'd be pretty clear that's not a house you want to mess with, right? Well, apparently not to everyone. One night, I'm sound asleep, dreaming about who knows what, when suddenly I'm jolted awake by this crazy noise. I'm talking sirens, lots of them. It sounded like the whole police force was outside my window. I jump up and peek out, trying to figure out what's going on. And guess what I see? A whole bunch of cop cars surrounding the sheriff dude's house. At first, I'm thinking, oh no, something bad must have happened to him. But then I find out the real story, and I couldn't believe it. Some knucklehead actually tried to break into the sheriff's house. I mean, come on. The giant police SUV was right there in the driveway, practically screaming, "A cop lives here!" And this genius still thought it was a good idea to try and rob the place. Oh, and get this. The sheriff was home at the time. Can you imagine being that burglar? You're sneaking around, thinking you're all slick, and then bam, you're face to face with the county sheriff in his own house. Talk about picking the wrong target. I gotta say, in all my years living here, I've seen some dumb things, but this takes the cake. I mean, of all the houses on our street, this guy chooses the one with a police vehicle parked out front. It's like he was begging to get caught. I don't know what happened to the guy after that, but I'm pretty sure his night didn't end the way he planned. And let me tell you, our neighborhood watch meetings got a lot more interesting after that. Story 25. All right, let me tell you about this wild ride that went down not too long ago. It all started when I was cruising around this neighborhood where this known car thief lives. I figured, why not swing by and check things out? So I roll up to this place, and what do I see? There's this SUV sitting in the driveway with no tags. Now, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull for a cop. I walk up, run the VIN, and bam. It's hot, stolen right off the street. Now, this property's got a main house, but our genius thief, he's living in this little mother-in-law suite out back. I'm thinking, this is going to be easy. Boy, was I wrong. I stroll out back, cool as a cucumber, and give a knock on the door. Next thing I know, I hear a car door slam. My brain's going, "Oh no, you don't," and I start booking it. By the time I get there, this guy's already fired up the engine of the stolen SUV, and he's tearing out of there like his pants are on fire. But here's the thing. I know this dude. I know where he likes to ditch his stolen rides. So I call up my buddy and have him stake out the spot. And wouldn't you know it? 2 hours later, like clockwork, here comes our SUV with a Jeep trailing behind. Get this. Mr. Smooth Criminal hops out, wipes down the dash, even gives the door handle a once-over like he's in some crime movie. Then he jumps in the Jeep and they start to pull away. But not so fast. We light him up and pull him over. Now, you'd think catching one car thief would be enough for the day, right? Wrong. Turns out, the woman driving the Jeep? Yeah, she's riding dirty too. That Jeep's stolen. But wait, there's more. We run her license, send another officer to her place, and guess what they find? Another stolen car. It's like we hit the jackpot of dumb criminals. So let's tally this up. We nabbed 2 thieves, recovered 3 stolen cars, and it all started because I decided to do a quick drive-by. Talk about a productive day at the office. I gotta say, in this job, you see some crazy stuff. But watching these two, thinking they're criminal masterminds while they're practically gift-wrapping evidence for us, that's the kind of day that makes you love being a cop. It's like they were trying to make our job easier. Story 26. I'm a retired police detective, and I've got a story that'll make you laugh and shake your head at the same time. So we get this call about an armed robbery at a dry cleaner's in a rough part of town. Now, you'd think robbing a dry cleaner's is already pretty dumb, right? But just wait, it gets better. This robber pulls out a gun, thinking he's all tough. But the owner of the place? He's not having it. The second the robber looks away, bam! The owner grabs the gun and disarms him like some kind of action hero. Now our genius robber panics. He turns to run, but here's where it gets wild. He misjudges the door and goes straight through the glass. I'm talking full on, shattering glass everywhere. We get to the scene, and among all the broken glass, there's this weird, fleshy-looking thing. Turns out, it's a piece of human ear. Yeah, you heard me right. This guy literally left a piece of himself at the crime scene. So, I grab this chunk of ear and head over to the county hospital. I figure our not-so-smooth criminal might show up there. Sure enough, not long after I arrive, in walks this guy matching the robber's description, holding a towel to his head. I ask to take a look, and wouldn't you know it, there's a big old chunk missing from his ear. I pull out the piece I found at the scene, and it fits perfectly, like a gory puzzle piece. Needless to say, I slap the cuffs on him right there. But here's the kicker. While the doc is sewing this guy's ear back together, I just had to ask, why on earth would you rob a dry cleaner's? And this guy, he looks at me all serious and says, I've been watching that place. They must rake in the cash. There's an armored truck there twice a day. I couldn't help but laugh. I had to explain to this genius that the armored truck was just dropping off and picking up employee uniforms for cleaning. Can you believe it? This guy thought he was going to hit the jackpot, and all he got was a torn-up ear and a trip to jail. I tell you, in all my years on the force, that's got to be one of the dumbest criminals I ever caught. I mean, leaving part of your ear at the scene? That's taking ear witness to a whole new level. Story 27. All right, so this isn't my story as a cop, but it's too good not to share. It's about my crazy college roommate who thought she was tough stuff. So picture this. I'm in my dorm room, minding my own business, when my roommate comes in all fired up. She's screaming and trying to attack me. And why? Get this. Because I turned off the TV when she wasn't even there. I mean, come on. I'm not about to get my butt kicked over a TV, so I call the cops. They show up, and this girl goes full-on wild child. She's not listening to anyone, so they have to cuff her. But does that shut her up? Nope. She's there, hands behind her back, still yelling about how she's gonna beat my ass. The cops are looking at her like she's lost her mind. They're like, "Oh, really? You're gonna beat her ass?" And this genius is nodding and agreeing. It's like she forgot she was talking to the police. But wait, it gets better. We end up in court, and the judge is trying to make sense of all this. He looks at my ex-roommate and asks, dead serious, "So, you think it's okay to beat someone's ass if they turn your TV off when you're not there?" Now, any sane person would realize this is their chance to backpedal, right? Not this girl. She looks the judge straight in the eye, nods and says, "Yes, I do." I swear you could hear the judge's brain cells dying. He just let out this deep, long sigh. It was like he was questioning every life choice that led him to that moment. I don't know what's funnier, the fact that she thought attacking someone over a TV was okay, or that she admitted it to a judge. Talk about digging your own grave. Let me tell you, after that day, I learned two things. Always pick your roommates carefully and never underestimate the power of stupidity in action. I bet that judge went home and poured himself a stiff drink after dealing with that level of dumb. Story 28. All right, let me tell you about a couple of the dumbest criminals I've ever dealt with. These stories are so ridiculous you'd think I'm making them up. So there I am at the station, buried in paperwork. I'm looking out the window, trying to give my eyes a break from all the forms, when I spot this kid at the bus stop a few yards away. Now get this. This genius decides the best way to impress some girls is to start smashing the glass of the bus stop. Real smooth, right? I'm sitting there watching this unfold thinking, is this guy for real? I mean, he's literally committing a crime right in front of the police station. I let out the biggest sigh, like I'm some tired old man, and drag myself out of my chair. I walk over, didn't even need to run, and arrest the kid. Shortest chase in history, I tell you. I bet those girls were real impressed when he got hauled off in cuffs. But wait, it gets better. This other time, we get a call about a break-in at a pharmacy. This guy had stolen a bunch of drugs, but here's the kicker. They were sleeping pills. Now, for some reason, only his pea-sized brain could understand, he starts popping these pills. Maybe he thought, if I eat the evidence, they can't prove anything. Who knows? So we start chasing this guy, right? But it's the weirdest chase I've ever been in. We start off running, but then it gets slower, and slower, and even slower. I kid you not, by the end, I'm just casually strolling behind this guy. He's stumbling around like a drunk penguin, fighting to keep his eyes open. Finally, we get him back to the station for booking. I'm filling out the paperwork, and I look up to ask him a question. And there he is, sound asleep, snoring away like he's in his own bed. I had to wake him up just to finish arresting him. I swear, sometimes I think these criminals are trying to make our job easier. It's like they're competing for a Dumbest Crook of the Year award or something. But hey, at least it gives us some good stories to tell, right? Story 29. Okay, get ready for this one. It's a story that still cracks me up every time I think about it. So, we're out on patrol, just cruising along in our squad car, minding our own business. Suddenly, this guy on a motorbike comes out of nowhere and starts swerving all over the place right in front of us. And wouldn't you know it, he loses control and wipes out. It was like watching a bad stunt in slow motion. We slam on the brakes and jump out to help. The poor guy's pinned under his bike, so we lift it off him. Now you'd think he'd be grateful, right? Maybe a little embarrassed? Nope, Not this genius. I ask him, "You all right, mate?" Just trying to be nice, you know? And this guy looks at me like I've got two heads and says, "Of course I'm all right. What do you mean?" I'm thinking, is this guy for real? So I say, "Well, you just fell off your bike, mate." And then he hits us with the kicker. He goes, "No, I didn't." I'm standing there, bike in my hands that I just lifted off him, and this guy's telling me he didn't crash. It's like he thought we wouldn't notice the whole man sprawled on the road under a bike situation. But he doesn't stop there. Oh no, he keeps insisting that there's no way he could have crashed. Must have been someone else, he says. I'm looking around like, who? The invisible man on the invisible bike? I gotta tell you, in all my years on the force, I've seen some wild denial, but this takes the cake. It's like he thought if he denied it hard enough, we'd just shrug and say, "Oh, our bad. Guess it was that other guy who magically disappeared." The whole time, my partner and I are trying not to laugh. I mean, what do you even say to that? "Oh, sorry, sir. We must have mistaken you for the other guy lying in the middle of the road under a motorbike?" I swear, sometimes this job feels like I'm in some kind of crazy comedy show. But hey, at least it gives us something to laugh about back at the station. And let me tell you, this story's become a bit of a legend among our squad. Whenever someone tries to deny something obvious, we always say, "Must have been someone else." Story 30. So this isn't my story as a cop, but it's a wild ride that happened to me before weed was legal in California. Trust me, it's a good one. So there I am, minding my own business at home, when these teenage knuckleheads decide to break in. But get this, they're so bad at being criminals that they get caught red-handed. My neighbor spots them and calls the cops. Talk about amateur hour, right? These kids grab whatever they can, some of my electronics, all my loose change, probably thought they hit the jackpot with that, and then they go for my personal stash. We're talking a whopping 3 grams of weed in my glass pieces. Real criminal masterminds, I tell you. Anyway, the cops haul them off, and I get called down to the station to ID my stuff. Now here's where it gets interesting. The cops are laying out all my belongings for me to claim, right? And there, sitting pretty among my electronics, are all my glass pieces. Now, if you don't know, these aren't exactly flower vases, if you catch my drift. But these cops, they don't say a word about it, not a peep. They just hand everything over like it's no big deal. Of course, they kept the weed. I mean, I wasn't expecting them to hand that back with a wink and a nod. But the fact that they gave me back all my paraphernalia without so much as raising an eyebrow, man, that was pretty cool of them. I walked out of there thinking, did that really just happen? It was like this unspoken thing between me and the cops. They knew, I knew, but nobody said anything. It was this weird moment of don't ask, don't tell with law enforcement. Looking back, I always think about how cool those cops were. They could have made my life difficult, but they chose to look the other way. It's like they were saying, we've got bigger fish to fry than hassling you over some glass. So yeah, I lost 3 grams of weed, but I gained a pretty awesome story and a newfound appreciation for cops who know when to pick their battles. And those teenage burglars? Well, I bet they learned a valuable lesson. Crime doesn't pay, especially when you're dumb enough to get caught in the act. Story 31. I had this job as a surveillance contractor. I get this assignment to find footage of a copper heist. These geniuses had been ripping out all the external piping from old school buildings. Real classy, right? Now, we're dealing with some crappy CCTV footage, and it's at night, so I'm thinking, great, this is gonna be like finding a needle in a haystack. I notice a couple of cameras are offline, so I start digging into why. And boy, did I hit the jackpot. Turns out these Einsteins came back for seconds. They'd cleaned out all the copper on night 1, but I guess they got greedy and came back for more. Now here's where it gets good. We've got perfect face shots of the first guy trying to break in. He's got his t-shirt pulled up over his face, thinking he's all sneaky. But this guy, he's got the coordination of a drunk giraffe. His shirt keeps falling down, and he's constantly yanking it back up. It's like watching a bad comedy sketch. At one point, this mastermind actually pulls the camera down. And what do we see? His partner in crime is being used as a human stepladder. I'm talking full-on stand on my shoulders action. It's like they're auditioning for a criminal circus act or something. But wait, it gets better. When the first guy gets tired, turns out crime is hard work. They swap places. And would you believe it? The second guy does the exact same routine. It's like they're competing for the most incompetent thief award. So, I've got all this gold footage, right? I show it to the constable, thinking we're gonna have to do some real detective work. But nope. This cop takes one look and goes, "Oh yeah, I know those guys. I'll go pick them up now." I'm sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? These guys were so well known that the cop recognized them instantly, even with their faces half covered. I gotta tell you, in all my time doing surveillance work, I've never seen criminals make it so easy for us. It's like they were trying to get caught. I mean, coming back to the same place 2 nights in a row, using each other as ladders. And let's not forget the t-shirt face mask that couldn't stay put. These guys didn't just leave a trail of breadcrumbs, they left a whole loaf. I bet when they got arrested, they were probably surprised it took so long. Sometimes, I think criminals like these are the universe's way of giving law enforcement a good laugh. I know I sure got mine. Story 32. This story is from back when I was still on the force. It's one of those stories that makes you wonder if some criminals are trying to make our job easier. So my partner and I are out on patrol in the middle of the night. We roll up to this cemetery where stolen cars often get dumped. Sure enough, there's a car sitting there, windows down, engine still warm. We're thinking, bingo, another stolen ride. But here's where it gets interesting. We run the plates, and it's not flagged as stolen. Weird, right? Then I peek inside, and what do I see? A meth pipe, just sitting there in plain view. It's like they were inviting us to take a closer look. Now seeing drug paraphernalia gives us the green light to search the car. And boy, did we hit the jackpot. We find a bunch more meth pipes, about 3.5 grams of meth, a little weed, and get this, a handgun. It's like a one-stop shop for illegal stuff. But wait, it gets better. There's this tablet in the car, unlocked and everything, and while we're searching, this thing keeps blowing up with messages. It's like a who's who of local meth heads trying to score. I'm thinking, are we on a hidden camera show or something? I take a quick look through the messages, playing detective. Turns out, the owner of this rolling drugstore had come out from the city to buy from one of our local gangs. But the gang didn't want her showing up at their place, so they arranged to meet her at the cemetery and do business elsewhere. Real classy operation they're running. Now here's where I decide to have a little fun. I leave a business card under the windshield wiper, not mine, the station's. On the back, I write a little note saying if she wants her stuff back, she should come down to the station. And you're not gonna believe this. At 9 the next morning, like clockwork, this woman shows up at the station. She's high as a kite, looking for her drugs and gun. I mean, who does that? It's like she thought we were running a lost and found for illegal items. I've seen some dumb criminals in my day, but this one takes the cake. She literally walked into a police station, high on meth, asking for her illegal drugs and weapon back. It's like she was trying to save us the trouble of hunting her down. Sometimes I wonder if these folks think we're playing some kind of game. But hey, if they want to make our job easier, who am I to complain? It's certainly made for an interesting shift and one heck of a story to tell back at the station. Story 33. All right, gather around, because I've got a story that'll make you wonder if some folks are auditioning for world's dumbest criminals. This one's from my dad, who's a cop, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. So, it's the middle of the night, you know, that magical time when all the crazies come out to play. My dad gets a call about some folks having a knockdown, drag-out fight in their apartment. The neighbors are all worked up about the noise, thinking someone's getting murdered or something. Dad rolls up to this place, and before he even gets to the door, he can hear the yelling. It's like a Jerry Springer show in there. He knocks, announces he's the police, and suddenly, bam, silence. You could hear a pin drop. Then the door opens, and there's this guy standing there, naked as the day he was born. Now, most people might be a little embarrassed in this situation, right? But not this Einstein. He doesn't even give my dad a chance to say, howdy. The first words out of his mouth are, I don't have a knife behind my back. I mean, come on! That's like saying, don't look in the closet where I'm definitely not hiding a body. It's practically a neon sign saying, hey officer, check behind my back. And guess what? Yep, you got it. This genius absolutely had a knife behind his back. It's like he was trying to win some kind of worst liar contest. But wait, it gets better. His partner in crime, also in her birthday suit, is in there with a stash of drugs. Turns out that's what they were fighting over. I guess sharing isn't caring when it comes to illegal substances. So there they are, buck naked, one holding a knife, the other hoarding drugs, and they decide to open the door for the cops. It's like they gift-wrapped themselves for arrest. Needless to say, both of them got a free ride to the station that night. I bet they were real popular with their cellmates, showing up bare-bottomed and all. You know, sometimes I think my dad's job is half law enforcement, half comedy show. But hey, at least it gives him some great stories to tell. So here's a pro tip for all you aspiring criminals out there. If you're doing illegal stuff, maybe don't answer the door for the cops. And if you do, for Pete's sake, put some pants on first. Oh, and leave the knife in the kitchen drawer where it belongs. Just a thought. Story 34. It was just another night of partying at my buddy's place. We were all pretty hammered, having a good time and being loud as hell. I guess one of the neighbors didn't appreciate our sense of fun and called the cops on us. So there I was, stumbling around my friend's house with a beer in my hand, when he gets a call from some other friends saying they're on their way over. In his drunken state, he thought it would be hilarious to grab his army rifle and scare the crap out of them when they arrived. Now let me explain something. Here in Switzerland, we have mandatory military service. After we finish our duty, we get to keep our rifles at home as our personal rifles. We're supposed to keep them locked up, but most of us just shove them in a corner somewhere and forget about them. The only thing is, we don't get to keep any ammo. Anyway, back to the story. My friend hears a knock at the door and assumes it's our buddies. He grabs his rifle, which isn't loaded, of course, and points it at the door, ready to give them the scare of their lives. The door swings open, and instead of our friends, it's the freaking cops. Apparently, the neighbor who called in the noise complaint mentioned something about a gun, and the police weren't taking any chances. I don't know all the details of what happened next, but let's just say my friend doesn't have an army rifle anymore. He had to pay a hefty fine and still had to finish his military service, but they made him do it unarmed. I guess that's what you get for being a drunken idiot with a gun. Looking back, it's pretty funny, but it could have ended a lot worse. I mean, what if the cops had thought the gun was loaded? My buddy's lucky he didn't get shot or thrown in jail. I guess the moral of the story is, don't mix alcohol and firearms, even if you think it's just a harmless prank. Trust me, it's not worth the trouble. Story 35. I was just trying to grab a quick bite to eat when this woman came running up to me, looking like she was in a real panic. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, officer! I need help!" she said, her voice shaking. Now, I wasn't even on regular patrol duty that day. I was working security at this big industrial plant, but I figured I'd see what I could do to help. I noticed she had parked her car in a fire lane, which wasn't my problem, but I thought I'd at least get some info in case she was really in trouble. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. That's when she hit me with it. "I think Qualcomm is using my Kia to send out their cell phone signals," she blurted out, her eyes wide with fear. I glanced over at her car and saw 2 cats crawling around inside, surrounded by piles of garbage. The woman herself looked like she had stepped right out of an 80s music video, with big hair, a hot pink shirt, and white pants. It wasn't even Labor Day yet, but I didn't say anything about that. "Why do you think Qualcomm is using your Kia?" I asked, trying to keep a straight face. She started rambling about this new cell tower they had built behind her house and how ever since then, her phone and radio had been acting weird. She even showed me her arm, and sure enough, every little hair was standing straight up, like she had stuck her finger in a light socket. I tried to explain to her why it was impossible for her car to be transmitting cell phone signals. I talked about frequencies and equipment and all that, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Her eyes just kind of glazed over, and she kept asking me where she could find a special scanner to check what her car was sending out. I didn't know what else to tell her, so I suggested she try looking for a message board for people who are into ham radios. But then she started asking me for the website address, and I knew I was in over my head. In the end, I made some excuse and got out of there as fast as I could. I called the local cops to let them know there might be a lady having some kind of mental breakdown in the area. And then I went back to my now cold lunch, shaking my head at the whole bizarre encounter. I guess you never know what kind of weird stuff people will come up with when they're convinced something strange is going on. But man, the idea of a Kia being used as a cell phone tower? That's a new one, even for me. Story 36. I'll never forget the day I walked into my local grocery store and saw a bunch of cops inside, talking to the staff. I figured something must have gone down, but I had no idea just how crazy the story was about to get. Turns out, some guy had been shopping in the store earlier, and when he was walking out, he somehow managed to drop a huge Ziploc bag full of crack right there on the floor. I'm talking like a gallon-sized bag just stuffed with the stuff. Can you believe it? Of course, the staff noticed it right away. I mean, it's kind of hard to miss a giant bag of drugs just lying there in the middle of the store. They called the cops immediately, probably thinking they had just stumbled upon some big-time drug dealer's stash. But here's where it gets really wild. Just as the cops are showing up to take statements and collect the evidence, guess who comes waltzing back into the store? That's right, the guy who dropped the crack in the first place. And he's not just coming back to do some more shopping. Oh no. This dude has the nerve to march right up to the staff and start demanding that they give him back his drugs. Can you believe the audacity? So there he is, yelling and threatening the poor workers, telling them he wants his crack back or else. I can only imagine the looks on their faces as they try to explain to this guy that they can't just hand over a bag of illegal drugs, especially not with the police standing right there. And speaking of the police, that's when they make their grand entrance. They walk in the door just in time to see this crackhead making a scene, demanding his drugs back like he's at the Lost and Found or something. I don't know what happened after that, but I'm pretty sure that guy ended up leaving the store in handcuffs instead of with his precious bag of crack. It just goes to show you never know what kind of crazy stuff you'll see when you're out running errands. I mean, I've heard of people losing their keys or their wallet at the store, but a whole gallon of crack? That's got to be a new one. And then to have the guts to come back and ask for it? That's a special kind of stupid right there. Story 37. I'm working my shift as the duty manager at this grocery store, right? It's just another normal day, or so I thought. Then, in walks this guy, who looks like he's straight out of a bad after-school special about the dangers of drugs. This dude makes a beeline for the cheese section and starts loading up his basket with block after block of the stuff. I'm talking like $5 chunks of cheddar, and he's grabbing them like they're going out of style. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that he's not planning on paying for all that cheese. So I position myself by the exit, ready to confront this guy when he tries to make a run for it. But just as I'm about to make my move, a cop strolls into the store like he's just there to pick up some donuts or something. I figure this is my chance, so I point out the shoplifter to the officer, thinking he'll just slap some cuffs on the guy and call it a day. But oh no, this cop has a different plan in mind. He walks right up to the junkie and starts chatting with him like they're old pals. "Hey there, what's your name?" he asks, all friendly-like. The shoplifter looks like he's about to pass out from the shock of being caught, but he manages to stammer out his name. "James." "Well, James," the cop says, putting an arm around the guy's shoulders, "that's an awful lot of cheese you've got there. You making a big old batch of mac and cheese for the family tonight? I swear, the color just drains from James's face. He looks like he's seen a ghost, and he tries to ditch the basket and make a run for it. But the cop's not having it. No, no, James, he says, steering the guy towards the checkout. You've got a family to feed with all that macaroni and cheese. Can't let them go hungry now, can we? And then, to my absolute shock, the officer makes James pay for every last block of cheese in his basket. We're talking $50 worth of cheddar, and this junkie hands over the cash like he's in physical pain. But here's the kicker. Not even 20 minutes later, James comes slinking back into the store, trying to return all that cheese. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? He really thought we were going to give him his money back after all that? Needless to say, we laughed him right out of the store. I mean, what did he expect? You can't just steal a bunch of cheese, get caught by a cop, and then try to return it like you changed your mind about what to make for dinner. Story 38. I used to work the night shift at this 7-Eleven in a pretty sketchy part of Chicago. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff go down, but this one takes the cake. It was just another typical night when these two guys come strutting in, looking like they're on a mission. They make a beeline for the counter and ask me for 2 bottles of Grey Goose vodka. Now, I'm not about to just hand over the goods without checking some ID, so I ask them to prove they're old enough to buy the stuff. To my surprise, they actually hand over their driver's licenses without any fuss. I take a look, make sure everything's legit, and then turn around to grab the 2 bottles of vodka from the shelf behind me. But as soon as I set the bottles down on the counter, these geniuses make their move. They snatch up the vodka and book it out of the store like their pants are on fire, leaving their precious IDs sitting right there in front of me. At first, I'm just standing there in shock, like, did that really just happen? But then it hits me, and I can't help but laugh. I mean, who leaves their actual identification behind when they're trying to steal something? So, I do what any responsible 7-Eleven employee would do. I call the cops. They show up a few minutes later, asking for a description of the thieves, and I just hand them the IDs. The look on their faces was priceless. They couldn't believe the level of stupidity they were dealing with. Now, here's where it gets even better. The address on one of the IDs was only a couple of blocks away from the store. The cops figured they'd try their luck and see if our vodka-loving friends were dumb enough to go straight home after their little heist. Lo and behold, not even 15 minutes later, the officers come waltzing back into the 7-Eleven with the 2 guys in tow, still clutching the unopened bottles of Grey Goose. I couldn't believe it. They didn't even have a chance to enjoy their stolen loot before they got caught. The cops asked me to confirm that these were the same guys who had run off with the vodka, and of course, I said yes. But you know what? I decided not to press charges. I figured these 2 had already learned their lesson. And besides, I got the vodka back unharmed. So I took the bottles, put them back on the shelf, and went about my night like nothing had happened. Just another crazy story to add to my collection of 7-Eleven adventures. Story 39. Let me tell you about this kid from my old beat. He was around 14 years old and dumber than a box of rocks when it came to shoplifting. I swear, this kid had a talent for getting caught. He knew I'd be at this one shop every single day, sitting in the security office with the manager, trying to catch thieves in the act. And you know how he knew that? Because I'd already busted him 4 times before. So picture this. I'm walking into the store, and the kid sees me clear as day. But does that stop him? Oh no, not this little genius. He proceeds to stuff his pockets full of candy and tries to waltz right out the door like he's invisible or something. Of course, I'm not about to let that slide. I follow him out of the store, and who do I find him with? His dad, of all people. I can't help but smile, and his poor dad just rolls his eyes and smacks the kid upside the head, like he's thinking, "Not again, you little idiot." Now, I'll admit, I gave this kid more chances than I probably should have. Part of it was because he was so young, and part of it was because his family was dirt poor. They couldn't afford to pay any fines or even get the kid to community service. But you know what they say about giving someone enough rope to hang themselves? Yeah, that was this kid. After catching him red-handed for the 5th time, I knew I couldn't let it slide anymore. It was the final straw. I haven't been on that beat for a few years now, so I can only hope that the kid has finally grown a brain cell or two since then. Maybe getting a bit older and wiser has taught him that shoplifting is a pretty dumb way to go through life. But man, I'll never forget the look on his dad's face every time I caught that kid. It was like a mix of disappointment, frustration, and just pure exhaustion. I almost felt sorry for the guy, having to deal with a kid who just couldn't seem to learn his lesson. In the end, though, I had to do my job. I couldn't keep turning a blind eye just because the kid was young and his family was struggling. It's a tough situation, but sometimes you've got to make the hard call and hope that it'll be the wake-up call someone needs to turn their life around. Story 40. All right, so my buddy's a cop, right? And he's got this one kid on his radar who's been a thorn in his side for years. This kid's not exactly a criminal mastermind, if you know what I mean. Picture this, broad daylight, and this kid just waltzes into his neighbor's garage and straight up jacks their bike. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. It's like he's got no concept of being sneaky or anything. But that's not even the half of it. This kid's constantly getting busted for stealing from stores, and he's not even trying to hide it. He'll just grab stuff right off the shelves like he's shopping for free. And sometimes he'll even get into little fights or break into places. The crazy thing is, he always gets caught. Like, every single time. You'd think after a while, he'd learn to be a little more low-key. But nope, this kid's got a perfect record of getting busted for every crime he's ever committed. Now here's the kicker. Because he's underage, the law can't really do much to him. He just keeps getting a slap on the wrist and sent on his merry way. It's like he's untouchable or something. But my buddy, being the stand-up cop he is, decides to give this kid one last chance. A couple of days before the kid's 18th birthday, my friend and his partner pay him a little visit at home. They sit him down and give him the whole "listen up, kid" speech. They tell him straight up, in a couple of days, you're going to be an adult in the eyes of the law. That means if you keep pulling this stuff, you're going to face some serious consequences. No more getting off easy. This is your last chance to straighten up and fly right. You'd think that would be enough to scare the kid straight, right? Wrong. 2 days after his birthday, guess who gets caught holding up a store with a gun? Yup, our little criminal prodigy. Last I heard, he's doing some serious time behind bars. We're talking decades, not just a little stint in juvie. It's like he was determined to throw his life away, no matter how many chances he got. Story 41. When you work in law enforcement, you see a lot of things that most people don't. Sometimes it's funny, like a criminal who's too dumb for their own good, but other times, it's just plain sad. I remember this one case I worked on, an overdose death. It's always tough to investigate those, knowing that someone lost their life to drugs. But this one really hit me hard. Part of my job is to go through the victim's personal belongings, looking for clues or evidence. That includes their phone and their internet search history. And let me tell you, what I found on this person's phone just broke my heart. A few days before they died, they had searched for how to snort fentanyl patches. It was like a punch to the gut. Here was someone who was so deep in their addiction that they were looking for ways to get high off something that's meant to help people with severe pain. You'd think that after seeing this kind of thing day in and day out, I'd become numb to it, that my heart would harden and I wouldn't feel anything anymore. But honestly, the more I dig into these cases, the more it affects me. Looking through people's phones and histories, you get a glimpse into their lives. You see their struggles, their pain, and their desperation. It's not just a case anymore. It's a real person who had hopes and dreams and people who loved them. And it's not just this one case. It's a pattern that we see all too often. People turning to drugs to escape their problems, only to end up losing everything, including their lives. Story 42. Here's a story for you. Can't give you all the nitty-gritty details, but let's just say it involves a couple of teenagers who got into some serious trouble. It all starts with a fight in this apartment complex. These two kids, one's 14 and the other's 15, they get into it real bad. Next thing you know, the younger one pulls out a gun and shoots the older kid right in the leg. Now the victim, he's in a world of hurt, but he's still able to give us a pretty detailed description of the gun that was used on him. That's a good start, but we still need to figure out who the shooter is. Luckily, we catch a break. Another kid from their school comes forward and gives us the shooter's name. Says he knows him from around campus. It's not much, but it's something to go on. So, my partner and I, we start digging. We figure, hey, this kid's only 14. He's probably not some hardened criminal mastermind. Might as well check out his social media, see if he's been stupid enough to leave any clues. And boy, let me tell you, we hit the jackpot. We pull up this kid's Instagram, and right there, plain as day, is a picture of him posing with a gun. And not just any gun, but the exact same type of gun that the victim described to us. I mean, can you believe it? This little wannabe gangster actually posted a selfie with the weapon he used in a shooting. It's like he was just begging to get caught. But that's the thing about social media these days. All these kids, they think they're untouchable. They want to show off, act like they're tough guys. So they post all kinds of incriminating stuff online. And then they act surprised when the cops come knocking at their door. It's like a treasure trove for us, honestly. We've solved so many cases just by scrolling through Facebook or Instagram. These kids, they don't realize that once something's on the internet, it's there forever. And it can come back to haunt them in a big way. Story 43. I'll never forget the case of the bumbling burglar who tried to rob the same restaurant he had just been fired from. It all started when this young teen got canned from his job at the local Red Lobster. Instead of just moving on, he got it in his head to come back that very night and try to steal some cash from the register. When he showed up, the employees recognized him right away and refused to hand over any money. But this knucklehead wasn't about to take no for an answer. He spotted the charity donation box on the counter and decided that was the next best thing. With a quick grab, he snatched up the whole box and made a run for it. I happened to be nearby when I saw the guy booking it out of there on his bicycle, the donation box rattling in his arms. I took off after him, determined to catch this dim-witted crook. As I followed the trail of coins scattered on the ground, it led me straight to a nearby church. There, cowering in the bushes, was my bumbling burglar, the bike he'd used to make his getaway propped up next to him. Needless to say, he didn't put up much of a fight when I hauled him out of there. I've seen my fair share of dumb criminals over the years, but this guy really takes the cake. Story 44. My cousin is a state trooper, and he's seen his fair share of crazy criminals over the years. But one incident in particular really stands out in his mind. It all started when he was about to clock out at the end of his shift. As he was heading home, he spotted a car absolutely flying down the highway. We're talking over 100 miles steamer. Without hesitation, my cousin whipped his cruiser around and took off after the speeding car. After a wild chase, he finally managed to pull the guy over. The first words out of the driver's mouth were, "You can't pull me over," to which my cousin calmly replied, I just did." Little did this knucklehead know, he was about to be in a world of trouble. A search of the car uncovered a whole stash of illegal goods, a pound of weed, a gun with the serial number scratched off, some meth, and a notebook filled with the guy's own rap lyrics. When my cousin started reading some of those lyrics back to him, the guy just about lost it. One of the lines said, "Ain't no pig ever gonna catch me. Fuck the police." Needless to say, my cousin had a field day with that one as he arrested the bumbling drug dealer. The guy must have thought he was some kind of criminal mastermind, zooming down the highway and talking big about evading the cops. But he ended up being his own worst enemy, practically incriminating himself with those ridiculous rap lyrics. Sometimes you just can't fix stupid. Story 45. I'll never forget the time I responded to a domestic violence call that quickly spiraled out of control. When I arrived on the scene, the woman claimed her husband had hit her. But when I asked for more details, her story took a truly bizarre turn. Apparently, the husband had recently suffered a heart attack and developed lupus, so he wasn't able to work anymore. Well, the wife didn't take too kindly to that. She felt he wasn't providing the kind of lavish lifestyle she thought she deserved. So she hatched this insane plan to start inviting friends over to have sex with her for money. And get this, she wanted her husband to act as the pimp and hold the clients at knife point to steal their money afterwards. I couldn't believe my ears as she laid out this whole felonious scheme right in front of me. When I asked if she realized what she was proposing was completely illegal, she just looked shocked. It was like she had no idea that planning prostitution and robbery was against the law. The real hero in this story, though, was the husband. He flatly refused to go along with his wife's idiotic plan, which is probably the only thing that kept them both out of serious trouble that night. If he had actually gone through with holding someone at knife point, I would have had no choice but to arrest him. As for the wife, well, I couldn't arrest her either, at least not at that moment. Since her scheme was still in the planning stages and no actual crime had been committed yet, there wasn't much I could do. I did make sure to pass the information along to my supervisors and the robbery and vice units, just in case she tried to follow through on her delusional plan. In the end, the best I could do was separate the two and drive the husband to a safe location to get him out of that toxic situation. I've seen my fair share of bizarre criminal behavior over the years, but this woman really took the cake. Talk about a couple who clearly had some serious issues to work out. Story 46. As the Amish couple sat in their horse-drawn buggy, minding their own business, these two morons pulled up and demanded that the couple hand over all their money. Now, anyone with half a brain knows the Amish generally don't carry much cash on them. But these knuckleheads apparently missed that memo. The Amish couple, unfazed by the thieves' threats, calmly gave them the license plate number of the pickup truck. Turns out, these dim-witted crooks were actually locals who should have known better than to try and pull one over on the Amish community. I can just picture these two idiots sitting there, stupefied, as the Amish couple refused to hand over any cash. They must have been scratching their heads, wondering how their brilliant plan had gone so wrong. Little did they know, the Amish have incredible memories. They weren't about to let these bozos get away with their attempted robbery. Sure enough, the police tracked down the would-be thieves in no time flat, thanks to that handy license plate info. I bet these clowns felt pretty sheepish when the cops showed up at their door. Bet they'll think twice before trying to pull another stunt like that again, especially on the famously non-confrontational Amish folk. Story 47. I'll never forget the night I went on a ride along with a local cop, and we stumbled upon one of the dumbest criminals I've ever seen. It all started when we got a call about a group of kids loitering around the Walmart parking lot late at night. When we showed up, the officer told the whole group to scram. As we started driving around to the back of the store, one of the cars from that same group suddenly pulled out in front of us. And get this, the passenger in that car actually opened the door and dumped out all their trash right there in the parking lot. I couldn't believe my eyes. Talk about the epitome of a bonehead move. This guy really thought he was going to just casually litter right in front of a cop car, driving at barely 20 miles per hour. Needless to say, the officer didn't waste any time pulling that car over and slapping the guy with a ticket. I have to hand it to these kids. They really know how to pick their battles. Loitering is one thing, but littering right in the face of the law? That's a whole other level of sheer stupidity. You'd think they would have at least tried to be a little more discreet about trashing the place. But nope, this genius decided the best course of action was to make a huge mess right under the cop's nose. I'm not sure what he thought was going to happen. Did he really believe the officer just wouldn't notice? Story 48. It all started when the girl came into class, looking a little worse for wear. When I asked her what was up, she sleepily explained that she hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. Concerned, I pressed further. And that's when she dropped the bombshell. Her uncle had been arrested. Apparently, this knucklehead and his buddy had the bright idea to steal a local ATM. I know. It sounds like the plot of some low-budget crime movie. But these two nitwits actually went through with it. According to my student, they used their truck to smash through the ATM's window, then chained it up and dragged the whole thing all the way back to their house. Can you believe the audacity and the sheer lack of foresight? The worst part is, they didn't even get away with it. The cops had an easy time tracking them down. They just followed the trail of damage left in the road straight to the thieves' front door. Talk about a couple of bumbling burglars. My student couldn't help but crack a half smile as she recounted the story. I guess even she realized how utterly ridiculous and ill-conceived her uncle's plan was. I mean, who in their right mind thinks they can just yank an entire ATM out of the ground and casually haul it home without getting caught? Needless to say, these two dimwits ended up facing some serious charges. And I bet the uncle is kicking himself for not thinking things through a little more carefully. Sometimes the bad guys are just too dumb for their own good. A harsh lesson he learned the hard way that night. Story 49. You wouldn't believe some of the silly calls I've gotten as a cop. One time, a mom phoned because her boys were fighting over Pokemon cards. Another lady thought wildcats had gotten into her house, but they were just tiny kittens. And one guy complained that ducks were snoring too loud in the pond near his home. Pretty funny, right?